Hey, everybody. I'm kind of coming in as a surprise today because I've had something on my mind and I just really felt like I needed to come in and talk about this some more. So, one thing that happens in churches like Calvary Gospel is that they have a tendency to um, not just have predators inside of them that can potentially groom children, but they participate in the grooming process. And this is kind of what I want to talk about today is how the church that I grew up in participated in the grooming that happened with me and um, how they may be doing that and not even realizing it. And I think when you don't realize things, it's hard to take responsibility. And we want them to take responsibility ultimately and hopefully learn from what's happened in the past and make changes so that no more children are hurt by the sort of things that happened to me when I was a kid. So, where to start? So, obviously, when you are a victim of childhood sexual abuse, you have been groomed more than likely by your abuser to trust them. You've been coerced into, uh, letting your guard down and allowing yourself to be vulnerable in situations with that person. But what often goes unnoticed is how the community around you can participate in that grooming process. So, in the church that I grew up in, um, a lot of people knew that older men were hanging around with very young girls, and there were a lot of whispers that would go on about certain young people and adult men. And the thing is that no one ever stepped in to, like, question it or stop it or say, "This is inappropriate." And so when you're the young person looking out at your community, what you're seeing is a bunch of adults who you trust and who you've been taught to believe are the authority figures and, in some cases, speak for God, ignoring what is going on with you. Now, the reason why this is such a big deal is that within, like, the church I grew up in, every little thing is nitpicked. So, you know, Sister Grant will notice if you're wearing clear nail polish and you'll get raked over the coals and you'll be told that, you can't come back to school if you have on that clear nail polish. Or, Sister Thorpe will notice if your dress hangs a little bit low in the back and she'll suggest that you need to put a sweater on before you go into the sanctuary. So, like, they will notice every little thing about you and what you're wearing, how you appear. Does your hair look like it might have been cut? Oh my gosh, call call the church elders together to talk about that. Maybe you shouldn't be allowed to sing on the platform anymore. Maybe you shouldn't be allowed to go to school anymore because your skirts aren't appropriately long enough. Um, so, like, they will nitpick and notice every little thing about a young girl, but then they will allow these really obvious things where, these older men are preying on young women. They will allow those things to go unchecked and unaddressed. And so when you're a kid and you feel like every little thing about you is under the microscope and you're so much responsibility for the safety of you and the men around you is placed directly on you. Well, then, uh, if something is so wrong, why isn't it being called out? Like, if they're going to call out these little tiny things, then surely they would call out this big thing of this grown man paying attention to you. And so, as a young woman, you see that this is being ignored. And it is a way that the group grooms you and says to you, even if they don't recognize that they're doing it, this behavior is okay. It's okay that this adult man wants to sit with you in church. It's okay that this adult man wants to drive you home every Sunday night. That's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine for an 11-year-old to be in the car of a 29-year-old on a regular basis, and no one is going to question that. But man, your sleeves had better be long enough or you're going to be called on the carpet and potentially be pulled out of any ministry that you're participating in. And this is the way that churches like Calvary Gospel participate in the grooming of young girls. They make it really apparent that this thing of older men hanging out with young women or courting young women does not rise to the same level of wrong as clear fingernail polish. So they become willing participants when they look the other way. I think that it also makes these young girls, I know from my own personal experience, feel very alone. I mean, you have a sense that if they knew what was going on, they would be very upset with you because you know that any kind of like sex or playing around before marriage is wrong. So you have a sense that if they really knew what was going on, they would come after you. Not that they would come after your predator, but they would come after you because from a very early age, it's the woman's responsibility to keep the man from lusting after her. I think that that's part of the grooming process because what it does is it teaches you to keep quiet. It teaches you that you can't really trust adults. You can't go to an adult and say, this is happening to me, and feel like they're going to take care of you and they're going to love you irregardless and they're going to be in your corner, because you know from a very early age that any step, any misstep at all is a really big deal and you're going to be blamed for it. So it isn't like when children make a mistake, you say to them, that's a mistake. And, we don't want to do that. And here's why we don't want to do that. I feel like the way that the church I grew up in handled it was like, oh my God, you made a mistake. You're a sinner and you need to repent and you need to straighten that out. And, because of that atmosphere, as a young girl, you're really afraid of making any mistakes or being perceived as having made a mistake. And so it makes adults like scorekeepers or policemen instead of people who you should be able to go to and trust to take care of you and to care for you when you've been hurt. So I didn't want people to know what Steve was doing to me because I knew, and I was right, that I would be blamed for it. And so why would I feel like I could trust any of the adults there, that I could go to them and say, hey, this is happening and I don't know how to stop it. So when those sorts of things happen, they become a part of the process of grooming young women. Predators groom young women and men by telling them things like, if anyone finds out about this, we're both going to be in really big trouble. Well, even though the church may not say that implicitly, young women have the understanding in their head that if they get caught in a situation like this, they're going to be blamed. They're going to be in really big trouble. And so they've already been groomed before that predator ever gets to them, that if they get caught, the church isn't going to be so forgiving about that. And I think that's so sad because really, if you want to teach young girls modesty and you want to teach young girls that they shouldn't have sex before marriage, there's a way to do that that allows for them to make mistakes and allows for them to come to you and say, I went farther with this boy than I wanted to go. Can you help me figure out how to have stronger boundaries? There's a way to set up a system for young women and men where they feel that they can come to the adults in their life and that they can trust them and that the adults will say, "Hey, let me pray with you and let's talk about this. Let's talk about how you might, have better boundaries next time." I would have never gone to anyone in the church and had a conversation like that because I would have known that first of all, everyone would have known about it because gossip was a really big problem in the church I grew up in. But also, I would have known that that adult would probably say, "Oh, well, we need to take this to Pastor Grant." And like, what young adolescent or pre-adolescent girl is going to want to have her business put in front of the pastor? Um, it just feels like such an invasion of privacy. Um, and I think that there's a better way of handling it that doesn't involve so much shame and fear. You can still, and I want to make sure everyone understands me that I'm not saying that churches aren't allowed to have standards and that they're not allowed to have beliefs about what is right and what is wrong with regards to holiness standards or adultery or sex outside of marriage or any of that. What I'm saying is there has to be a better way of dealing with it that doesn't make you a part of the problem. And so even when we're talking about shame, for instance, if you're a young woman and you know that if you go and talk to an adult woman in the church about maybe having gone too far with a boy and uh wanting to reinforce your boundaries, you know that that's going to go to the pastor. And so you know that there's going to be a shame element involved, and you know that people are going to gossip. And the fear of having people gossip about you and feeling that shame and having to carry that shame is part of the grooming process as well. Like, you're not going to want to do it. You're not going to want to talk to that adult. And, that sort of brings me to another topic that I want to touch on: the gossip. The gossip and the fact that if a woman is caught in a compromising situation or heaven forbid, abused by an adult man, she will carry the shame of that with her for the rest of her life. I feel like within the church I grew up in, and maybe the UPC in general, you're only as good as your biggest sin. So, whatever your biggest sin is that people know about, that's who you become, and you carry that label with you for the rest of the time that you're there. You will always be the girl who was molested. You will always be the girl who had sex when she was 16 or whatever. Like, that's always going to be a part of who you are and how people perceive you. And let me tell you, I know people that came into the church after I was molested who were fully informed about what happened to me and the whole sordid affair. There wasn't any reason that they needed to know. There wasn't any reason that the story needed to be repeated, but it was. And they were informed of exactly who I was. And, it's the knowledge of those things that keeps young girls from feeling like they can trust the people in their life who should be looking out for them, who should be their spiritual leaders, who should be the people that they can trust. And that's going to keep them from feeling like they have anyone to go to. So I guess this message is for Calvary Gospel Church and any other UPC churches or any other churches in general that have this problem. don't believe for a second that because you haven't molested a child, that you somehow are without sin or without blame or without responsibility if you have turned a blind eye away from a child, if you have gossiped about a child, if you have turned your nose up or shunned a child because you know that they were being molested. Or even if you know that that child, maybe that young person is 16 and they just had sex with their 16-year-old boyfriend or girlfriend. If you gossip about that child or you turn your nose up or shun that child, you bear some responsibility for whatever happens to that child. I mean, churches are communities, and communities are responsible for loving and teaching and helping to raise children. And every time you turn your back on a child who's been sexually abused, you're definitely a part of that grooming process. I know that when I told my pastor about what happened to me, and I watched one by one as every adult in my life turned their back on me, I realized in that moment that everything that I was afraid of had just come to pass, and that I was right, that this was going to happen, that I was right for being afraid. And then when I became aware that they were talking about me, talking about a 12-year-old girl, not in a way of, let's all see how we can get together and help this child, but in an, oh my God, did you hear sort of way, I knew then that in the church's eyes, I was pretty much ruined and I would never get my reputation back. And I would never be clean. It didn't matter how much I repented down at the altar or how much I tried to serve God through being involved in ministry. In the eyes of those adults, I would always be tainted. And that, my friend, is how churches participate in the grooming process. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask them of me in the comment section, but also feel free to email me at survivingchurchandchildhood@gmail.com. And you can also reach me at my blog, Surviving Church and Childhood at WordPress. So I'm really thankful for everybody who came and listen to me share. And if you know young people in your life who are going through this, please, please, please support them. Don't turn your back on them. Don't gossip about them. Show them love because they need it. Thanks, guys. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.